Introduce our speaker today, Denise Lieberman, who is a nationally recognized voting rights lawyer who has been on the front lines of voting rights debates in Missouri and around the country for the last 20 years. She serves as director and general counsel of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, a nonpartisan statewide network of voter advocates. Denise has testified in support of the Voting Rights Act before Congress and is also faculty director of the Voter Access and Engagement Initiative at Washington University in St. Louis, where she is an adjunct professor of law and political science. So without further ado, I'm going to let you take over, Denise.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really delighted to be back with all the great people at Voice, and delighted to be able to share our lunch and learn with you. I'm going to be speaking today on accessible registration and voting, and I'm going to pull up my slides here, and feel free to put questions into the chat or jump in with questions you may have. I want this to be as valuable and helpful for your needs as possible. Okay. Oopsie, here we go. I'll be speaking today on accessible registration and voting in Missouri, because we know it's so important that everybody be able to have a voice and have a say in their own futures. I am the director and general counsel of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, which is Missouri's nonpartisan state voting rights table. So we never take any position on any candidate or ballot measure or political party. Our goal is to ensure that every eligible voter is able to cast a ballot, and in particular, looking to communities who face the greatest barriers to casting a ballot. And that often includes our seniors, people with disabilities, people who may be in long-term care facilities. We anchor 4 areas of work in Missouri related to voting, including policy advocacy. We track all of the bills that are pending in the Missouri legislature. We anchor strategic litigation. We just came back from trial, in fact, this week on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the NAACP, challenging some voter registration, third-party voter registration, and absentee voting restrictions that would probably be of interest to this particular community. We do voter education and engagement programs like this one, and we run the nonpartisan election protection program on election day. We do have statewide calls every Monday at 10 a.m. on Zoom, and certainly welcome your presence and welcome the full diversity of organizations around the state. We have approximately 70 affiliated organizations that work with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, and do have an accessibility committee that specifically looks at ensuring access for voters that may have impairments or voters with disabilities. And so I would say we're a big tent, as you can see. You can get more information on our website or by texting MOVPC to 66866. So I'm going to break this up into 2 pieces today. First, ensuring accessible voter registration and debunking some myths about voter registration, and then focusing on casting a ballot, in particular for individuals that may have various impairments that may make that difficult. And this is important. It's important, again, in a nonpartisan way. As the late Congressman John Lewis said, the vote is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have in a democratic society. And that only really resonates if everybody's voices are allowed to be heard. And what we know, of course, is that sometimes the voices who are most often unheard in our society are the ones that are critically important to making policy decisions and understanding the lived experiences of all. And that's because everybody's voice matters. Everybody's voice matters, whether you're young or old, whether you have impairments, whether you are rich or poor, whether you are have a postgraduate degree or have a GED, your voice matters because your life matters. And the vote is how we make decisions about our own futures and bring our own lived experiences to the table. Yet what we know is that 1 in 4 eligible Americans are not registered to vote. So it really starts with voter registration. And this may impact people that you work with, probably not people who are turning 18, but many people move. And particularly, we know that our seniors and those who are making a move into a long-term care facility or nursing home are going to need to update their voter registrations. And even sometimes within facilities, people may move from independent senior living into an assisted senior living division of a facility, and are going to need to update that voter registration to make sure that they get their information and that they're eligible to vote. So we do a lot of work with senior centers where people are moving even within the facility from one type of care to another type of care to make sure that their registration is updated. And for people who maybe haven't voted in a while, they may be find themselves in inactive status or have been purged from the rolls. So just because somebody may have registered a long time ago doesn't necessarily mean that they are on the rolls now or on the rolls at their current address. There may be a lot of barriers to registering to vote, including just lack of access to voter registrations. But the good news for people who are in care facilities is that those facilities need to make voter registration available for eligible residents. But we know that for many people, there's a lot of confusion and maybe a lack of trust about what's happening. And what we see is that even among people who are registered to vote, a majority have never been asked. And so having a trusted team member who can talk to residents about why voting is important to them can help address those barriers. So let's get started. Registering to vote. First of all, for you all, if you are, as part of your job, assisting your clients, your residents with voter registration and getting paid to do so, you will need to complete a solicitor form with the Secretary of State's office. This is just for people who are getting paid to solicit 10 or more voter registrations, where you are assisting a voter in getting them registered to vote. And it will require your signature. You can find this form online. It is a fillable form online at sos.mo.gov, and you can email it back and you'll get an email confirmation. We have palm cards about voter registration that we're happy to make available for any place that wants them. If you want to have those out and make them available, we also have them available in large print if that's going to be more accessible for folks. So the first question you want to ask is, are you registered to vote? And you can help folks figure that out. You can check somebody's voter registration. If you have their name, their date of birth, their address at sos.mo.gov/elections. One trick here is that website's a little bit wonky. It doesn't allow you to include things like a street or boulevard, avenue. So you just put the street number and the street name without that suffix, and that will pull up whether the person is currently registered to vote, and you'll be able to see where they're registered to vote. So people that need to register or re-register, for your purposes, this is probably going to be mostly people who have moved or people who have not voted in a while or have never been registered to vote in Missouri. And in Missouri, voter registration is county by county. It is overseen by local election authorities, and that's typically county by county. And each local election authority is responsible for processing voter registrations in their county and keeping those rolls up to date. And one thing that's a little bit confusing if you are in the St. Louis area is that St. Louis City is a different election jurisdiction from the rest of St. Louis County, which includes all of the suburbs of St. Louis and the unincorporated parts of St. Louis County. So eligibility to register to vote is simply a matter of being over 18 by election day, a United States citizen, and a resident of Missouri. These are people who are eligible to register to vote. But there are some categories of people who are not eligible. And that's where we get into people that may have cognitive impairments. In Missouri, a person who has been adjudged mentally incapacitated to vote is not eligible to register to vote. In addition, those who are under a sentence of imprisonment, have been convicted of a felony, or are on probation or parole for a felony conviction. Once you are off probation or parole for that felony, you are eligible to register to vote. But getting back to the issue of mental incapacity and guardianship, this is a source of confusion for a lot of folks because Missouri's Constitution includes a provision that says no person who has a guardian shall be entitled to vote. But Missouri statute goes into greater detail and requires in a guardianship proceeding that the court indicate specifically whether a person who has a guardianship retains the right to vote. Okay, and this may apply to a large number of people. We know that there are people who may be under a partial guardianship, or who may be under guardianship for purposes that are not related to incapacity, right? So my mother, for example, is 93 years old. I now have taken over doing her finances and her checkbook and paying her bills every month, but she's mentally competent. In fact, she spends all day long watching CNN. That's all she does, is keep up with the news, and is very interested in voting and fully capable of making her own choices in voting. And so simply because I may be empowered to make decisions related to her finances doesn't mean that she is incapacitated to vote. So the key issue here, and then the one that you want to ask, is if the person has a guardianship, does the order say that you retain the right to vote? Right, and it is one of the little number here on my slide is the section of the Missouri case law, section 475.075, that sets forth the different findings that a court needs to make in a guardianship order, including whether the person retains the right to vote. And so unless the order says no, you do not retain the right to vote, then you can register and vote. And similarly, in a probate proceeding, unless the person has been deemed incapacitated to vote, they will retain the ability to vote unless they have been found incapacitated to do so. I want to give a shout out here to our friends at Missouri Protection and Advocacy Services, who really do a lot of work on this specific issue of guardianship and voting, and are a really strong resource in supporting individuals who may be under some type of guardianship. You can also call the Election Protection Hotline at 866-OUR-VOTE to get additional help in looking up whether someone is registered to vote. Second important thing, know the deadline. It is October 9th for the upcoming presidential elections. That means that somebody needs to be registered, have submitted their voter registration application by October 9th in order to be eligible to vote in the upcoming presidential election. And what this means is if you have a postcard that's going in the mail, it has to be postmarked by October 9th. If you are assisting a person in registering to vote online, which for some of your residents, that may be easier because instead of filling out the postcard, you can just click on certain boxes. That needs to be submitted by October 9th as well. Under a 2022 law, someone who has moved, who is a valid registered voter and has recently moved from one jurisdiction to another, including from St. Louis City to St. Louis County, they're two separate jurisdictions, or from Kansas City to another part of Jackson County, those are also two separate jurisdictions, no longer have to meet the registration deadline to update their registration. And they can do so up to and including on election day at election headquarters. But that can be kind of treacherous. I strongly recommend helping people update their registration in advance, whether or not they're trying to get a ballot in the mail or vote in person during absentee voting or on election day. There are some exceptions for people who move to or from the jurisdiction after the registration deadline. Now, there are many ways to register to vote: online, in person at a social service agency, including the Department of Health and Senior Services is one of the state agencies that is required to provide voter registration. In addition, a home assistance organization, you may have clients that have recently come out of home health or have family members who are in home health. A home health assistance organization also is required to offer voter registration. People can also send a voter registration application in through the mail. And these services need to be accessible. So at least half of Missouri's voter registration agencies have to be accessible to people with disabilities. Interpreter services need to be provided to those who need it if they need help, completing that voter registration application. And any agency that provides home health services to people with disabilities must offer voter registration. Voter registration agencies must provide assistance to voters who need assistance. And if a person is not able to read or write, they may sign with their mark. Okay, so for example, and that includes people who cannot read or write, not just because of low literacy, but also because of disability. My mother, for example, I'm going to keep using her as an example. She's 93. She has a hand tremor. She really is not able to write legibly anymore. But the voter registration application does need to be signed, so she can just scribble something. For the rest of it, I can assist her in completing a voter registration application or an absentee ballot application, and you can as well. Someone who needs assistance filling out that form is entitled to assistance. And keep in mind that it's important that the voter registration form be legible, because that is the information that the local election authority is going to use to complete the person's voter registration. And this, I really want to emphasize that that rights of voters with disabilities is guaranteed by state and federal law. Indeed, voters with disabilities make up the largest single demographic voting bloc of voters. More than 35 million Americans identify as a voter with disabilities, a sixth of the total electorate. And there are many federal laws that guarantee accessible voter registration, accessible ballots, accessible voting equipment, and ensures the right to assistance in voting. Discrimination against people because of age or disability is illegal in voting. So addressing one of the areas of confusion, right now, it is absolutely legal for anybody to be able to register voters in Missouri. You do not need to be a registrar, and you do not need to be a Missouri registered voter yourself. So maybe you live in Illinois, but come over to Missouri for work. You are able to assist your clients or residents in registering to vote. Only, again, if you are paid as part of your job to do that voter registration, then you have to complete that solicitor form. And remember, when you do collect voter registrations, you want to develop a system at your agency for getting those returned very quickly to the correct local election authority. They need to be returned within 7 days. They can be returned in person. They can be returned in the mail. What lots of agencies do is have like big manila envelopes, one that's addressed to St. Louis City, one that's addressed to St. Louis County, one that's addressed to St. Charles County, or wherever your jurisdiction lies. And then anytime you get a completed voter registration form, pop it in that envelope and get it out the door. We are currently in court. One of the reasons that there is some confusion about voter registration rules is that there was a law passed in 2022 that would have made it illegal for anybody to be paid or otherwise compensated for doing voter registration, and would require anyone doing voter registration to be a Missouri resident and a registered voter in Missouri. These are not in effect right now because of the lawsuit. And again, we just came back from trial on this case. These provisions are not going to be in effect during the 2024 election cycle, as this case continues to be assessed by the court. So again, that means that if you have volunteers, they don't need to register with the Secretary of State's office. So maybe you have people that are coming into your facility as volunteers. They can help do voter registration without having to complete any forms. Again, it's only people who are paid that have to fill out that solicitor form. And you don't need to be a Missouri resident. So again, people who may be driving over from Illinois, maybe Illinois residents who work here in St. Louis, are still able to register people to vote. So real quick, and then we're going to jump into the voting pieces. The full voter registration form does include a set of instructions. And if you are helping people register to vote, one thing you want to be sure of is that everything gets completed. Because the last thing you want to do is help somebody register to vote and have that application get denied or placed in pending status because it's missing necessary information. So you can always refer to these instructions. Here's what the form looks like. And I want to just show a couple of things that are absolutely mandatory that you can help make sure that your residents and clients are doing. Really important, those really, really, really tiny boxes at the top. Box number 1 and box number 2. Are you a U.S. citizen, and will you be 18 or older on election day? Those are absolutely mandatory. And if they are not checked, the person will not be added to the rolls. And this is very small print. It's very hard to see. A couple of things. First, you can, and what I often do is take a highlighter and highlight that whole line to make sure that people see it. If you're assisting a voter, you can also ask them, and once they confirm, you can check the box for them. Another thing you can do is take this voter registration form and blow it up. It doesn't have to be submitted in the same size that the postcard comes in. And so you can blow it up to like 150% or 200% and have a larger piece of paper that may be a little easier for people to see. You are also free to write in the information for the voter. And we do this a lot when we visit senior centers. Again, it is up to the voter to ask for that assistance or say, yes, I want that assistance, but you are absolutely free to offer to do that. You can't complete a card for somebody without their permission and consent, of course. But we really want to make sure that the cards are legible and that they are complete. So boxes 1 and 2, absolutely critical. You can't go further until those are checked. Next, you'll see right under that there is a place to indicate whether it's a new registration, an address change, or a name change. And that will help make sure that the application gets into kind of the right category. For many of you, it may be an address change. The person's first and last name need to be included and the current address where they live. And that has to be a street address, not a PO box. You can add a PO box if somebody gets their mail somewhere else, but the box number 5, the address has to be a physical address. That's how they determine what precinct the voter is located in. Boxes 7 and 8 require an inclusion of a driver's license number or last 4 digits of Social Security if the voter has those things. If they don't, they can leave it blank. But what those boxes ensure is that the voter's identity can be verified. So what happens after the card gets to the election authority is that they run the voter's name, date of birth against data that's included in the driver's license database and in the Social Security Administration's database. And that ensures that they are in fact a real human being. And so sometimes if somebody may use a name that's not exactly their complete name or their full name, try to get it as accurate as possible. If somebody puts, for example, Bob Smith on their voter registration card and they're listed in Social Security as Robert, probably the election authority is going to figure out that's the same person. But somebody who uses a nickname or uses a name that is not their official name, that could create some problems down the line if they're trying to match that information. Date of birth is required. Make sure that they don't indicate today's date. That's a common mistake. Date of birth, that helps ensure that the person is in fact old enough to vote. Place of birth is optional. So is a phone number or an email address. But if the person wants to include that information, it may allow the election authority to follow up with them if there's something that's missing or incomplete on their voter registration. If they were registered somewhere else, they can include where they were last previously registered. Again, helps kind of connect the dots like, okay, this is the same person. Political party affiliation is new after 2022. It is optional, but box 14 is mandatory. They have to sign. You cannot sign for them. Nobody else can sign for them. Again, if they have an impairment that makes it difficult to sign, they can scribble, they can use their mark, but it does need to be signed, and you can help them date it. For people that may find it easier to access this information online because less writing is required, you can register online at sos.mo.gov if you have the ability either to print out the registration and then sign it, or if you have the ability to sign electronically, like on a tablet, for example. If you go to that page, you'll see that you can print an application or actually submit the registration application completely online. And it has the exact same fields as the postcard in the exact same order. So you really want to make sure that all those included pieces are on that registration card before you submit it on the voter's behalf. And that's getting registered to vote. I want to move on, and unless there are questions about voter registration, I was going to move on to actual voting. Alrighty, and let's jump into the voting part. And here's where I think you may have some more questions. We are happy to provide you and your facilities with informational materials like palm cards that can help provide people with additional information. We have these as kind of like walk cards, but we also have them available blown up in sort of full page size for people that need large print. So we're going to start with absentee voting. That's going to be probably a practice that many of the people you're working with will use. And there are some important deadlines to know here. Absentee voting in Missouri begins 6 weeks before Election Day. And it's really hard to believe that we are heading into fall already, but it's coming. You know, absentee voting for the presidential election will begin on Tuesday, September 24th, 2024. You can actually already start submitting applications for absentee voting, and the absentee ballots will begin getting sent out after September 24th. For people who are on the permanent absentee list, I'm going to get into that a little bit later. The election authority begins sending out applications for absentee voting about 10 weeks before Election Day. People can request an absentee ballot be sent in the mail up until the second Wednesday before Election Day. So for this upcoming election, a request to get an absentee ballot in the mail must be received by the local election authority by 5 p.m. Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. But if you know people that are confined, that are not planning on going to vote in person, I strongly encourage you to encourage them to request an absentee ballot in the mail sooner rather than later. As you can imagine, the election offices are very, very busy around those deadline times. The mail can sometimes be unreliable in getting that ballot to the person, especially if you're going through kind of a mail service of a facility. Because someone that gets an absentee ballot in the mail, they're going to have to complete that ballot, have it and have it returned to the election authority by Election Day. It has to be received by the election authority by Election Day. Voters in Missouri also have the option of voting absentee in person. You can vote absentee in person. So these may be for people that are that are somewhat mobile, but maybe don't want to deal with the crowds on Election Day. They can begin voting absentee in person at a local election authority office or satellite location starting 6 weeks before Election Day, again, September 24th. But beginning 2 weeks before Election Day, you can vote absentee in person without providing any reason. And this is a great option for people that may not meet one of the reasons to get an absentee ballot in the mail, because that's limited to identifying one of 6 reasons. But people who are in long-term care facilities or nursing homes will meet that criteria because they are confined due to illness or disability. So getting a ballot in the mail. And we include this on these materials. You will need to indicate a reason, like I'll be out of town on Election Day. The one that is going to be probably most relevant for the people you work with are people who indicate option number 2. that they are confined due to illness or disability or serving as a caretaker at the same address. So you may, some of you may be doing home health and working with people who have caretakers who live at the address with the person. They are also entitled to get an absentee ballot. And people who are in long-term care facilities are by definition confined and can get an absentee ballot. And in some jurisdictions, the local election authority will actually come to the nursing home or care facility to assist voters in getting those absentee ballot applications completed. People who are in long-term care facilities will also qualify to be placed on the permanent absentee voter list, which would then get them an application, not a ballot, just the application before every election. In many jurisdictions, election authorities will also come back to a nursing home or care facility to do absentee voting there on the spot. In St. Louis City and St. Louis County, because of new voting machines, it's now much easier for the election authorities to take voting and make it more portable and take it to facilities. In order to get an absentee ballot in the mail, the voter does need to apply. Now, this application can be submitted by email, by mail, by fax, or in person. The person needs to indicate their name, the date of the election for which they wish to receive an absentee ballot, and indicate the reason. Indicate the address where they are registered to vote and the address where the ballot is to be sent. They do have to sign it. So again, people that have some mobile impairments, they still have to sign the application, even if somebody else is assisting them in completing the other pieces of the application so that it's legible. In addition, so when the person gets the absentee ballot back in the mail, again, they are entitled to assistance in completing the ballot. A person who provides that assistance does need to sign the absentee ballot envelope. So for example, I provide assistance to my mother because she is not able to, she is on the permanent absentee list now, but she's not able because of her hand tremor to fill in the circles for the option she wants. So we sit there together. I read it to her. She also has cataracts now and can't read the ballot. So I read it to her. I list the choices and she tells me who she wants to vote for and I fill in the circle for her. She then has to scribble a signature, but I complete the rest of it. And then I complete a statement where I check and say that I provided assistance and I have to sign the document and print my name. The outer envelope of the absentee ballot needs to be filled out, even though it may contain information that's very similar to the information on the absentee ballot application. It still needs to be completed. And this is important. This is a new rule that just came down this year. Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft just issued a rule this summer in June that states unequivocally that an absentee ballot is deemed received by the local election authority, is deemed cast, sorry, by the voter when it is received by the local election authority, and expressly prohibits an election authority from contacting a voter or allowing them to correct even minor errors or omissions on the absentee ballot envelope. This is really important because this is something that in the past, in 2020, for example, St. Louis County called people, and these were disproportionately seniors and disproportionately people in nursing homes who missed checking a checkbox on that outer absentee ballot envelope and allowed them to cure or correct that error, allowing those applications, those ballots to be counted. This is no longer allowed. So if you are helping people with absentee ballots, please, please, please help make sure that the absentee ballot envelope is fully completed and that the voter signs it, because otherwise this vote of this eligible voter will not get counted. And we know that many of these absentee ballot envelopes have very small print, little bitty check boxes that are very hard to see. And most importantly, people often forget to sign it. I recently had a conversation with Eric Fay, the director of elections in St. Louis County, and he recently ran a check of who absentee ballots got rejected because that envelope was incomplete. And it won't surprise you to learn that it was disproportionately people on the permanent absentee list and people in nursing homes who had simply missed a checkbox or the signature line on the absentee ballot envelope. So remember, people can get assistance completing this envelope. So please help make sure that, that their votes are able to count. If you've requested an absentee ballot in the mail and haven't gotten it, call the local election authority. And there are sometimes problems with the mail, especially as we get closer to election day, it just takes them a longer time to process. So that's why we suggest getting that request in earlier, the better, so that it is taken care of well before election day. But if you never got the application, you still can go vote absentee in person. You can go vote no excuse absentee in person. You can even go vote on election day. If you never got your absentee ballot in the mail, you just sign a statement saying you didn't get it, and you can vote a regular ballot. But keep in mind that people who did get absentee ballots in the mail, those absentee ballots have to be returned to the election authority office. We do not have drop boxes in Missouri for absentee ballots, and you cannot return somebody else's absentee ballot at a polling place, only the election authority office. And that absentee ballot can only be returned by the voter or by a close relative within 2 degrees of consanguinity. So a spouse, a child, a grandchild, etc. I want to talk about ID because this is also an area of confusion that also disproportionately impact our seniors and people in nursing homes who may no longer drive. And we know that here in Missouri, after 2022, we do require a Missouri or federal photo ID, but, and this is important for your residents, a lot of people believe that the ID has to be unexpired. It can be recently expired. What the law says is that it has to be a Missouri or federal photo ID that is either non-expired, non-expiring, like say, for example, a veteran's ID card, or has expired after the last general election. This year, the last general election was November 8th, 2022. So if you have somebody who has recently come into care, whose driver's license expired sometime after November 8th, 2022, they can use that ID if they wish to vote in person. The photo ID law only applies to people voting in person. either in-person absentee or in person on election day. People voting absentee by mail do not need to provide a photo ID unless they have never voted before, in which case they will need to provide a copy of their ID with their application. And we know that this law disproportionately impacts our seniors who are more likely to have expired IDs and have no need to get another one. Again, my 93-year-old mother hasn't moved. Her name is the same. Her address is the same. She stopped driving some years ago, and she's able to use that expired driver's license for a whole host of things. Her bank takes it, her doctor takes it, because it's all accurate information. But because it expired before 2022, it's not valid to vote. And so I actually went and we got her a non-driver ID. But she doesn't need any of those things because now she votes absentee by mail. So that's one way to for people that may have expired IDs or may not have the underlying documents necessary to get a state ID, because it does require a certified copy of your birth certificate, something proving your social security number if you haven't already provided those things. So this is challenging because one of the things that the new law did is eliminate things like a voter registration card as a valid form of ID. We know many seniors relied on that card they get in the mail because it was very convenient to use to vote. That is no longer acceptable. Voters that do show up at the polls who don't have a valid form of ID can cast a provisional ballot, but that ballot is only going to be counted if the person returns with photo ID or if the signature on the provisional ballot envelope matches the signature from their voter registration. Now, this is kind of tricky, especially for our seniors whose signatures may have changed since they registered to vote. My mother is, again, another example. She first registered to vote in Missouri in 1952. And her signature does not look anything like her signature in 1952. She has since updated that signature because she has the scribble now. And that's really what allows that the signature comparison allows her absentee ballot to count. So be careful with these signature match things for our seniors in particular that could be precarious. If your person has a state ID or a driver's license, the address does not need to match their voter registration address. It just needs to be a valid license that is either non-expired or expired after November 8th, 2022. And voters have a right to help in casting ballots, even when they do go to the polls. Now, I think that many of the folks you are dealing with are probably going to want to get that ballot in the mail. But there are a lot of people for whom voting in person is very important. It's a social activity. It is part of the fabric of our democracy. I know it's something, you know, what my mom appreciates the convenience of voting by mail, but she also feels a sense of loss, I think, of being in the voting space on election day and being part of democracy. And there's a value as well to other voters seeing that our seniors, that people with disabilities are part of our communities and they have a right to vote and they have a right to assistance in voting, whether or not it is because of a literacy issue, a disability issue, they have a right to assistance. And this is what the law says in Missouri. Any voter can request help from either a bipartisan team of election officials or any person of their choice at the polls if they need help reading or casting their ballot before, during, or after voting. That includes interpretation. That includes reading the ballot for a person. That includes helping them actually fill in the bubbles and casting their vote. That includes helping them get into the polling place or getting to an accessible machine, or plugging in accessibility features like headphones. And we see this every election where a poll worker says, hey, you can't go into the voting booth with that person. I saw it at my own polling place when I went to vote last time. There was an elderly person there who was there with their adult child who was helping them maneuver the ballot, and the poll workers screamed at them, and we did some advocacy and said, no, they have a right to be there if the voter wants that. And the assistant doesn't have to be a registered voter in Missouri. So, you've got your adult child visiting from Illinois, they can take their parent to vote. We are in court right now on behalf of voters with disabilities. Missouri Protection and Advocacy Services is one of the plaintiffs in the case, challenging one part of Missouri's law that makes it very difficult, because while a voter can request help from any person they want except for their boss or union rep, the person providing that help can only help one voter. So that makes it difficult for agencies like some of yours who may have staff that are going to want to provide assistance to multiple people. That is currently not allowed. We are challenging this law in court under the Voting Rights Act, which also provides very clearly that a person has a right to assistance by anyone they choose. So we really want to emphasize that regardless of the reason you need help reading or casting your ballot, and it doesn't have to be a visible disability, right? So my mother has cataracts and really can't, probably needs new glasses too, really cannot read anything that is small print. Someone with dyslexia, right? Someone who may have some cognitive impairments, but is still mentally competent to vote, may need someone to help read that ballot to them. In addition, voters who have impairments that prevent them from either entering a polling place or standing in a long line in the polling place have a right to vote curbside. And this is an important right. It is also something that we see lots of problems with every election cycle, because election officials have to come out to vote the person in their car. As long as you are within 200 feet of a polling place and believe that you would not be able to enter the polling place or stand in line for a lengthy time, you can request curbside voting. There is nothing special you have to do to request curbside voting. As long as a poll worker is alerted that you need curbside voting, they have to provide it. So please call our election protection hotline if you are aware of anybody having problems with this. We had a bunch actually 2 weeks ago during the primary election where they were just forgetting about curbside voters and not coming out to vote them. It can be confusing for voters too, because Missouri law does not require signage for curbside voting. Some places have it, some places don't. The city of St. Louis in particular is under a Department of Justice consent decree related to voters with disabilities. And the city is required to have a buzzer, a doorbell at every polling place for someone to push to request curbside voting. St. Louis County, in contrast, does not. I will note that the doorbells in St. Louis City are fairly low. So if a person with a disability is driven themselves, it's going to be very difficult for them to see that button. In any event, if a person with a disability has someone that they drove with, that person can go inside and say that they need curbside voting, or anybody else outside the polls can alert a poll worker that the person needs curbside voting, and they can't just be left to sit there. They have to come out and be serviced. In addition, if your polling place is not accessible, and this is true for lots of places in the city of St. Louis, it's one of the reasons the Department of Justice got involved in creating a consent decree for the city, because so many old buildings, you can permanently have your polling place reassigned. Hospital voting, people that find themselves confined unexpectedly, but on election day, can get voted in a hospital. So say you didn't request an absentee ballot, you plan to go vote in person, but you land in the hospital after the deadline to request a ballot in the mail. The election authority has to go to the hospital, send a bipartisan team to the hospital to, it's basically like a curbside voting situation in the hospital. They have to vote them in the hospital. And in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, the election boards have a reciprocal relationship. So for example, if you are a registered voter in St. Louis County, but you find yourself at Barnes Jewish Hospital, which is located in St. Louis City, St. Louis County will come down to Barnes to vote that person because they're a registered voter in the county. The city cannot vote that person because the person's not a registered voter in the city. Similarly, if you're a city resident and you find yourself out at MOBAP, same thing, the city will come out to MOBAP and do that. If you find yourself unexpectedly in a hospital far away, that's not gonna work. So keep in mind, and feel free to call us if you have any further questions about that. Finally, voters are entitled to accessible machines. So people who are visually impaired, a human sounding voice can read the ballot to them. There should be a set of headphones, but we know from our litigation and anecdotal experience that sometimes those headphones are not there. A voter can bring their own if they wish. Voters can select a large print on the voting machine. Similarly, if a person is dyslexic or has an intellectual disability and needs to have the information read to them, that they can avail themselves of that. If you have limited use of your hands or have mobility impairments, you can use, you can just press the button or use the knobs on the machine. And there have to be low level and wide wheelchair accessible booths at every polling station. And finally, if you are confined due to illness or disability, you can be added to the permanent absentee voter list. And anybody that is at a nursing home, even if they're able to get out and about, would be considered eligible to get on the permanent list. All this means is that the voter will be sent an application for an absentee ballot automatically. And they would be eligible to vote under that option number 2, confined due to disability or illness. They would get their ballot in mail. The ballot would not have to be notarized. This is a great option for many seniors. Again, they are not required to vote absentee just because they're on this list. For people who are in nursing homes in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, the election officials are willing to come to your facility to do in-person voting at long-term care facilities. If that's not happening in your location, give the local election authority a call, or we're happy to help assist in doing that advocacy for you. And finally, just last minute, I know people sometimes get worried about going to the polls. There's a lot of vitriol. Things like intimidation and misinformation are illegal at a polling place, and everybody deserves to have the right to freely come and go and not be subject to discrimination or intimidation at the polling place. Finally, last little thing, where do I vote? If you have people that want to go vote on election day, a couple things that may be different from when they last voted in both St. Louis City and St. Louis County. Voters can cast a ballot at any polling place. St. Louis City and St. Louis County now can vote at any polling place. But your folks, again, can also vote absentee in person, absentee by mail, or by asking the local election authority to come to your long-term care facility and undertake absentee voting there. For people that live in other jurisdictions, they can look for a postcard similar to this that they'll get in the mail that will tell them where their polling place is. For people in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, they'll get a list of nearby locations. Finally, we can always use help. We get, I think that the largest kind of category of problems that we see voting do have to do with our seniors and people with disabilities. And that's why we are recruiting people to be poll monitors and work and attorneys that want to work answering the phones at the Election Protection Hotline. This helps ensure that there's a friendly face for voters and ensures that people who need curbside voting in particular are able to get it. So if you know somebody that might be interested in donating a few hours of their time on election day, you can sign up at protectthevote.net for election protection. And I want to open it for questions, but I want to end really quickly with this short video. Oopsie, hang on. The Missouri Voter Protection Coalition is proud to be a sponsor of Dance the Vote's Midterm Matters here at the Missouri History Museum today, because midterms do matter.
I'm Joan Lipkin. I'm the founder of Dance the Vote, and we use the arts as a platform to promote voting literacy for people of all ages. So that means music and dance and poetry and photography. I started this 6 years ago with some friends, and I thought that if we could somehow use the arts, that we would be able to energize people. You can start with a small idea. You never know where it's going to go.
The right to vote is not about politics. The right to vote is about the ability of each person to have a say in the matters that are on the ballot.
My name is Katie Rodriguez-Bannister. I am a speaker, author, and disability educator, and I strongly believe in the power of the vote. I think that we need to count on everybody. As a person with a disability, I've lived in a wheelchair for 32 years, and I've seen advancement, but we still have a long go for the disability vote because there's a lot of discrimination out there.
And people ask me the question as a Baptist preacher, why are you concerned about that issue? Because if you can take away that right from women, who's next? Democracy is under attack. And I think that if we don't understand that now, then there's absolutely no hope for the future. Those issues bring on a host of other things, a host of other concerns, but it starts there. It starts with democracy, and democracy is under attack.
If all of us do not have a voice on the people who represent us or the laws that dictate how we live and breathe, then we are not truly free.
So I want to thank you for your time and want to open it up for questions that folks might have about any of these issues.
Thank you so much, Denise. We do have a few questions. There's a few in the chat and in the Q&A. Are you able to see those, or should I read them?
Okay. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and read them?
Okay. One person says, so basically, if you can forge a signature when you show up without ID, you can vote, or you can vote absentee without showing an ID of any form.
So that's not exactly true, because you are required to, well, I'll take those in two places. because none of those ballots can be counted unless your signature matches the signature on your voter registration. So a forgery is not gonna cut it. And so, for example, absentee. In order to vote absentee, you have to complete an absentee ballot application, and the actual voter has to sign that application. The application goes to the election board. The election board looks up your voter record to see if you're a real person and make sure that you're actually registered to vote. And then they compare the signature on your absentee ballot application with the signature that they have on file with your voter registration. And if they, unless they determine those match, you won't get an absentee ballot in the mail. Then, assuming those match, you get the absentee ballot in the mail. You also have to sign the absentee ballot envelope. The envelope, you put your ballot in the mail, so you don't sign your ballot because we have secret voting, but you put that ballot in the envelope, and the envelope is a legal affidavit that you sign under penalty of perjury. It is a Class 1 election offense to forge or falsify any information on an absentee ballot envelope. And you do have to actually sign the absentee ballot envelope. If it is not signed, the ballot will not be counted. And again, when that absentee ballot comes back in, they then compare the signature on the absentee ballot envelope with the signature in your original voter registration file. So everything that your entire voter history is in the statewide voter registration database, including every time you have signed something. So if you've requested an absentee ballot in the past, they have a scanned copy of your voter registration. Some jurisdictions actually keep all the paper copies as well. They'll have a actual copy of your previous absentee ballot application if you voted absentee 20 years ago. So they'll use that to compare the signatures. For election day, if you show up and you don't have any photo ID, you can cast a provisional ballot, but the only way that ballot will count is if your signature that you do in person on election day on the provisional ballot matches the signature on file with the local election authority. So it really prevents any type of forgery from occurring. In fact, what the data shows is that we brought in some handwriting experts to in our court challenge on this case, and I really learned a lot about it. What the data shows is actually that local election authorities tend to over reject valid signatures rather than the other way around. So you may sign slightly differently if you're rushing or if you're holding a bunch of stuff like on election day, or you might be ill or something like that. Those tend to be circumstances where election authorities are more likely to reject even a valid ballot than they are to accept an invalid one. The data shows that really doesn't happen.
All right, good information. Let me know if that answered your question. Let's see, there's another one that says the rule of only being allowed to assist one voter only applies to in-person voting at a polling place, correct?
Right. That's right. So
Okay.
if you're helping somebody, for example, complete a voter registration form, and I've gone out and done voter registration at senior centers and had people there, but they have to request your help. But someone, would you like me to print this for you so that it's neat, that the penmanship is neater? But the person still has to give you all the information, and the actual voter always has to sign it themselves.
Okay. Another question about solicitor forms. Helping our residents to fill out voting applications and forms to vote is part of our job description as a recreation director. Do I need to fill out the solicitor forms? I have about 22 residents voting on site in October.
Yeah, you do. Because it's part of your job and you're getting paid. If I was someone that showed up and I was volunteering at your center and I was helping people do that, I wouldn't need to do it because you're not paying me.
Okay, let's see. I emailed to ask the St. Louis County Nursing Home Coordinator if, as an activity director, I need to fill out a solicitor form. They assumed not, and we're not sure what that was. Do activity directors working in a senior community need to be registered as a solicitor if they are the person in the community supporting the voting within that community?
Yeah, if you're getting paid. So again, the law is that if you are getting paid or otherwise compensated to do voter registration, then yeah, and if part of your job as the activities director is to facilitate voter registration, then you should complete the form.
Okay. Does the person voting in Missouri need a valid Missouri state driver's ID, or is any valid state driver's ID valid to register to vote here?
So after the law changed in 2022, it now has to be either a Missouri or federal ID. So, you know, and I know people that, maybe have been living in Illinois, have an Illinois driver's license, came over to St. Louis as they aged, and now maybe are in a nursing home in St. Louis because that's maybe where their kids are. That Illinois license won't be good enough. If they want to vote in person, it needs to be a Missouri or federal ID. But remember, a federal ID includes more than just a passport. And so there may be a lot of folks that are former military, and if they have a veteran's ID card that is either expired after November 8th, 2022, or is non-expiring, a veteran's ID card is valid. A military ID is valid.
Okay. Let's see. If we were to get any resident after application deadlines who was registered at their old home within the same county, would they still be able to participate in the absentee nursing home voting, or would they have to go to another polling place and mail a ballot? Or mail a ballot?
Can you say that one more time?
If we were to get a new resident after application deadlines who was registered at their old home within the same county, would they be able to participate in the absentee nursing home voting, or would they have to go to another polling place or mail a ballot?
If they were, so there's a new law that was passed in 2022. If they were registered in Missouri, they can update their registration at any time. They don't need to meet that registration deadline. But they also, maybe they move from Illinois and into Missouri after the registration, or moved into the nursing home after the registration deadline, they can vote absentee from their old address and update the registration at that time.
This is kind of a follow-up question that
Okay.
may provide a little more information. It says, when a resident moves in, we ask them if they want to vote at our facility. If they say yes, we fill out an address change voter registration. For each election, we ask every resident if that is registered, if they would like to vote. If the resident isn't cognitively aware enough to vote, unless they have a guardianship that states otherwise, they still have the right. Do they still have the right to vote? I just want to make sure this is correct. Sorry, it's a long one. I'm just trying to keep up
Because of
with
the
it.
pushback. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that this is correct because we get a lot of pushback because we are memory care.
Yeah. I mean, and look, people's conditions change and can change rapidly, of course. What the law says is that if you have not been adjudicated incapacitated, then you have the right to vote. So that's what the law states. Now, certainly if you're providing it, and if the person is like cognitive enough to know that they want to vote, what you cannot do is coerce a person in any way, shape, or form, right? And I know that you all know this already. You can't coerce them to vote. You can't coerce them not to vote. You can't coerce them how to vote or who to vote for. You can assist them in reading or explaining things. I know, like with my mom, even though she's competent. She's 93, and there's some things that like I've noticed cognitive decline, and so we were going over some of the ballot measures, and she was like, what? And I was reading it, and she didn't understand it, what it would do. And so what I did was I went on the Legal Women Voters website to Vote 411, which has the nonpartisan voter guide. And they usually have it kind of in simple language, what it would mean for this. And I read that to her. I said, here's what they're saying. Here's what the Legal Women Voters says about this ballot measure. Does that help you understand it better? And, and then I said, do you feel like you understand this enough to be able to vote on this? And you don't have to vote for everything. I mean, I'm a big believer that, the further down the ballot, the better. But, even if she maybe wasn't cognitive enough to fully understand the ballot measure, she knew who she wanted to vote for Senate, right? She knew who she wanted to vote for governor. So, and she wasn't confused about that. So, but what the law says is that there has to be a finding of incapacity, that, we don't just get to sort of be like,
All right, that is great information. I'm not seeing any further questions. So let's see. I can.
There's an address question. Our campus has been divided and is now 2 addresses. Some residents are under the other address. Do I need to fill out a change of address form even though same business name? Well, I guess it depends on where the mail is coming in. I mean, if you have 2 separate facilities and they're of different addresses, and a person actually physically lives at address number 2, they probably need to be registered there, especially if the mail is going to address number 2. If all the mail comes into one place, then it's probably going to be fine, because there's only one address. We get that a lot actually on college campuses too. Like Washington University, the address for the whole university is 1 Brookings Drive, even if the people live in the South Fork. And there's parts of WashU that are in St. Louis City and parts that are in St. Louis County, and so they have to indicate kind of specifically where they are living, and they can't just use that 1 Brookings Drive address.
All right. I think that is it on the questions. So just to follow up, I will be sending out slides and the recording of this webinar within the next week. If you are waiting on CEUs, those will be sent out as well. Denise, thank you so much for doing this webinar with us. This was very informative and very fascinating. So yeah, if anybody, hold on, maybe one more. Nope, just kidding. We are done. All right.
Well, so if as things move forward, like I said, we're hitting voter registration and absentee voting season. Any questions that anybody has, don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's exactly what we're here for. We'll be running election protection. We're here to help make sure that everybody has the tools they need to allow their voices to be heard.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Denise.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.